The laughter was the first thing that hit her, sharp and brittle as shattered glass. It echoed in the cavernous ballroom of the Shinjuku Park Tower, a sound Nia hadn't heard in 10 years, but recognized instantly. It was Brittany's laugh, high, condescending, and aimed directly at her. An archivist? Brittany's voice dripped with saccharine pity, her perfectly glossed lips twisting into a smirk. Seriously, Nia? You spend your days with dusty old books? I always knew you'd end up surrounded by dead things. Her two friends, clones in glittering cocktail dresses, tittered on cue. Nia's fingers tightened on the stem of her champagne flute. The crimson of her dress, a sleek, sleeveless column of silk, had felt like armor when she'd put it on. Now, under the fluorescent cruelty of her former classmates' gaze, it felt like a target. She had come to her 10-year high school reunion tonight telling herself it was about closure, about proving to her younger self that she had survived. But survival, it seemed, wasn't enough for them. You had to have triumphed in a way they understood, with a wealthy husband, a corner office, a life lived loudly on social media. Her life was quiet. It was measured. She worked for a private collector, restoring priceless manuscripts from the Edo period. Her hands, steady and patient, brought dying art back to life. There was a deep, resonant satisfaction in it, a silent conversation with history that was more fulfilling than any boardroom victory. But it was impossible to explain that to Brittany, who measured worth in carats and square footage. It's important work, Nia said, her voice lower than she intended, swallowed by the ballroom's din. Oh, I'm sure it is, Brittany cooed, waving a dismissive hand, diamonds flashing on her fingers. But come on, live a little. I'm a senior partner at my father's law firm. Tiffany is married to a surgeon. We have lives. What do you have? Paper cuts. The laughter came again, and this time it stung worse. Nia felt a familiar heat creep up her neck. She had been the quiet, studious girl in high school, the one who preferred the library to the pep rallies. An easy target. She had hoped, foolishly, that a decade would have sanded down their sharp edges. It had only given them more expensive tools for cruelty. She was formulating a retreat, a polite excuse to melt back into the anonymous crowd, when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure change, a sudden drop in temperature. The ambient chatter near the grand entrance faltered, then died completely, the silence spreading like a ripple in a dark pond. He moved like the room owed him space. Everyone turned to look. He stood framed in the doorway, a figure of absolute stillness in a bespoke charcoal suit. It wasn't just the tailoring, which was so precise it looked less like fabric and more like a second skin. It was the way he held himself, a predatory calm, an economy of motion that suggested immense power held in reserve. A dragon tattooed in traditional ink coiled up his neck, its head just visible above the crisp white collar of his shirt. More ink shadowed the skin at his wrists, a dark promise beneath the cuffs of his French silk shirt. Nia's breath caught. She knew him. Not the man he was now, this avatar of cold authority who commanded the attention of an entire ballroom without saying a word. She knew the boy he had been. Ryo Tanaka. He had been in her calculus class, a ghost in the back row who never spoke, his eyes always holding a storm she couldn't decipher. He'd been an outcast of a different sort, not ignored like her, but actively avoided, as if the other students could sense the dangerous current running beneath his quiet surface. They had shared one conversation, a brief, forgettable exchange over a textbook. Then he had disappeared a month before graduation, and no one ever mentioned him again. Brittany and her friends had also noticed him. Their mockery of Nia was forgotten, replaced by a preening, hungry interest. "Who is that?" Tiffany whispered, her eyes wide. "I have no idea," Brittany breathed, already straightening her dress, "but I'm about to find out." But Ryo wasn't looking at Brittany. His gaze swept across the room, dismissive and sharp, until it landed on her. For a heartbeat, the entire world narrowed to the space between them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers, and she felt a jolt, a flicker of recognition that had nothing to do with a shared high school history. It felt deeper, more ancient. That was when she made the mistake of looking away, breaking the connection. The spell was broken. Brittany saw her chance. She sashayed toward him, a shark sensing opportunity. "I don't think we've met," Brittany began, her voice a silky purr.
I'm Brittany.
Rio's eyes didn't leave Nia. He gave no indication he had even heard Brittany speak. He started walking, his path direct and deliberate. He moved through the crowd, and it parted for him as if by instinct. Brittany, assuming he was coming to her, smiled triumphantly. He walked right past her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers, his focus so singular she became nothing more than an obstacle in his path. The look of stunned humiliation on her face was almost comical. He stopped in front of Nia. The scent of his cologne reached her first, cedarwood and something else, something like cold night air and smoke. It was clean and dangerous. Up close, he was even more imposing. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a detail she'd never noticed in the back of a classroom. The silence around them was not empty. It was heavy, charged with the unspoken questions of 200 people.
Nia, he said.
He said her name differently than anyone else had. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a claim. The sound of it, low and resonant, vibrated through her, silencing the echo of Brittany's laughter for good. "Rio," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Behind him, Brittany's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. This was her stage, her audience. And the quiet girl she had just finished mocking had stolen the star of the show without even trying. The victory was so swift, so absolute, that Nia almost felt a pang of pity for her. Almost. She gave a small, sharp nod. Anything to get away from the prying eyes, from the suffocating weight of her own past. She told herself it was survival instinct. He placed a hand on the small of her back. His touch was light, almost impersonal, but the warmth of it seared through the silk of her dress. It was a gesture of possession, a public declaration. As he guided her away from the gawking crowd, she could feel every eye in the room on them. They were no longer laughing at her. They were staring in confused awe. What she did not know yet was that she had just traded one kind of cage for another, infinitely more dangerous one. He led her not out of the ballroom, but through a discreet door at the back, into a private service hallway. The opulence of the party vanished, replaced by stark white walls and the low hum of industrial ventilation. The sudden shift was disorienting. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. "Somewhere safe," he answered, his voice flat. He didn't look at her. His eyes were scanning the corridor ahead, his posture subtly changed. The relaxed dominance he'd projected in the ballroom was gone, replaced by a taut, coiled readiness. They emerged onto a deserted rooftop terrace. The Tokyo skyline glittered around them, a breathtaking panorama of neon and steel. The wind was cold, whipping a strand of her long hair across her face. He led her to the far corner, shielded from the entrance by a row of large planters. "You shouldn't have been there," he said, finally turning to face her fully. The city lights carved sharp angles onto his face, making the scar over his eye seem deeper. "At my own reunion?" Nia countered, a spark of defiance rising in her. "And what about you? I don't remember you being the sentimental type." A muscle feathered in his jaw. "This hotel is mine. The reunion was a coincidence. I was here for a meeting." He paused, his gaze intense. "A meeting with the Ishikogumi. It did not end well." The name meant nothing to her, but the tone in which he said it sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. "They know I am here," he continued, his voice a low gravel. "And now, they know I left with you. You were a target of ridicule a moment ago. Now you are a target of a different kind. In their eyes, you are a liability. My liability." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. The petty humiliation of the reunion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fear. This wasn't a game. This wasn't about high school drama. This was real. What does that mean?" "It means you cannot go home tonight," he said, his expression unyielding. You can't go back to your apartment, your job, or your life. Not until I have dealt with this. To them, anyone close to me is a pawn. And you, Nia, just became the most visible piece on the board. That was the moment everything changed. She wasn't just the quiet archivist anymore. She was the woman who had walked out of the ballroom with Ryo Tanaka, the head of the Kurosawa clan. And in this glittering, deadly city, that was a kind of death sentence. The safe house was a penthouse in Roppongi Hills, a sterile cage of glass and white marble overlooking the sprawling city. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress, cold and impersonal. For 3 days, Nia was a prisoner in paradise. Ryo was a constant, silent presence. He barely spoke, moving through the vast apartment with a contained energy that made the air around him crackle. He spent hours on the phone, his conversations clipped and spoken in a tone that was pure command. Nia watched him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the quiet boy from her memory. She saw flashes of him. In the way he'd stare out at the city lights, a profound loneliness in his eyes, or in the brief, unguarded moment he thought she wasn't looking, when the mask of iron control would slip. On the 4th night, the silence between them finally broke. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the amber liquid catching the light. "You're not afraid of me," he stated, not turning around. It wasn't a question. "Should I be?" she asked, her voice even. She was sitting on a white leather sofa, a rare book she'd found in his sterile library open in her lap. He finally turned. His gaze was heavy. "Yes, I'm more afraid of being a target because of you," she said honestly. "I don't understand any of this. The Ishikawagumi, the Kurosawa clan. This isn't my world." "It is now," he said, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. He took a sip of his whiskey. "The Ishikawa clan and mine have been at war for generations. A new leader has taken over for them. He is young, reckless. He wants to prove himself by taking what is mine. My territory. My honor." He paused, his eyes darkening. "My weakness." That was when his wound was revealed. It came out not in a flood of emotion, but in a quiet, chilling narrative. "There was a woman before," he said, his voice dropping so low she had to strain to hear it. "Her name was Akemi. She was a musician. She saw something in me that wasn't a monster. She believed she could save me from it." He looked down into his glass. "The Ishikawa clan used her to get to me. They took her. I was too slow, too arrogant. I thought I could protect her without sacrificing who I was. I was wrong." The shame he carried was a palpable thing in the room, a cold weight that seemed to press down on them both. "I found her, but it was too late. I learned a lesson that day. Power is not about what you can build. It is about what you are willing to destroy to protect what you claim. And you can't claim anything if you have a weakness." He looked at her then, and his eyes were filled with a bleakness that stole her breath. "They see you. They think you are my new weakness." Before she could process the terrifying intimacy of his confession, the world exploded. The armored glass of the window beside him spiderwebbed, a silenced gunshot creating a starburst pattern right where his head had been a second before. Ryo moved faster than she thought possible. In one fluid motion, he threw his glass, dropped to the ground, and lunged for her, tackling her off the sofa and onto the thick rug. His body was a hard, warm shield over hers, the scent of cedar and smoke filling her senses. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. Another shot hit the window, then another. The sound of his men shouting orders echoed from the hallway. Ryo was already moving, pulling a sleek, black pistol from an ankle holster. His competence was a form of intimacy she was not prepared for. He moved through violence like it was a language he was born speaking, precise, economical, never wasted. He pressed her against the wall behind the sofa, out of the line of fire. "Stay here. Do not move." He disappeared into the chaos of the firefight erupting in his own home. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified, but a strange clarity cut through the fear. She could stay here, cowering behind a sofa, a helpless victim in his war. Or she could do something. She was a survivor, not a damsel. She crawled toward the hallway. One of Rio's men was down, his leg bleeding profusely. Another was returning fire from the doorway. She saw one of the attackers, dressed in black, fall just inside the apartment. He dropped a small, encrypted burner phone. This was her world now. He had said it himself. While the firefight raged at the front of the penthouse, she made a choice. She crawled to the fallen man, her hands shaking as she grabbed the phone. Her mind, trained to see patterns and details in ancient texts, went to work. This was just another kind of code. She ducked back into the living area, her mind racing. It was a simple substitution cipher, something she'd seen in historical espionage documents. By the time Rio returned, the immediate threat neutralized, he found her not crying in a corner, but sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, furiously scribbling on a napkin from the coffee table. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his face grim, a smear of blood on his cheek that wasn't his. "They weren't trying to kill you," she said, not looking up. "Not yet." This was a test. To see a response time. To map the security, she held up the napkin. "They're planning a full assault on your warehouse in the Harbor District. At midnight. They think you'll be here, vulnerable." He stared at her, then at the napkin covered in her neat, precise script. He took it from her hand. His eyes scanned her work, a flicker of something, disbelief, maybe even respect, in their dark depths. He looked from the decoded message back to her. She was covered in dust. Her beautiful red dress was now wrinkled and stained, but her eyes were clear and steady. She had had a chance to be a victim, and she had chosen to be a weapon instead. That was the first charged moment between them. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken reality of what she had just done. She hadn't just helped him. She had crossed a line. She had chosen a side. His side. He knelt in front of her, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was featherlight, but it sent a shockwave through her system. "You continue to surprise me, Nia," he whispered, his voice rough. She held his gaze, her heart still beating a frantic rhythm. She told herself it was the adrenaline, but she was lying to herself. The war had come to them, and in its aftermath, something new and dangerous was beginning to grow. He showed her the interrogation of the one attacker they had taken alive. He didn't force her to watch, but he didn't hide it from her either. He left the door to his study ajar, and Nia found herself drawn to the sound of Rio's voice, cold and surgical as he dismantled the man's will piece by piece. She saw a side of him that was utterly without mercy, a chilling abyss of control and violence. It should have made her run. It should have sent her screaming for the sterile, safe world of her archives. But it didn't, because beneath the monster, she saw the man driven by the ghost of a woman he couldn't save. She saw the shame that fueled his rage, the honor code that both saved and isolated him. She was seeing the whole man, not just the parts that were easy to look at. And that was a terrifying kind of intimacy. The enemy escalated. The failed attack on the penthouse had been a test, but her decoding of their message had turned it into a humiliation for the Ishikawa Gumi. Their new leader, a man named Kaido, could not let that stand. He decided to change tactics. If Rio was protecting his new weakness so well, Kaido would remind her of the world she had left behind. One of Rio's men, a silent guard named Haru, brought her a sealed envelope. It had been delivered to her old apartment building, intercepted before it could reach her door. Inside was a single photograph. It was of her, sitting at her favorite cafe near her archive, taken a week before the reunion. She was smiling, lost in a book, completely unaware. On the back, a single sentence was written in neat script. "We know where you sleep." The threat was no longer abstract. It was personal. They had been watching her. They had been in her space, her quiet, ordered world. The last vestiges of her old life felt contaminated, violated. The stakes were no longer just about Rio's empire. They were about her very existence. She didn't show Rio the photo. She slid it into the book she was reading, a silent, cold weight pressed between the pages. It was her secret, her fear, to carry. But he knew. He saw the change in her, the new tension in her shoulders, the way she no longer stood near the windows. That night, she found him in his private dojo, a stark room with tatami mats and a single rack of weapons. He was practicing with a wooden sword, his movements a blur of controlled force. Sweat glistened on his bare back, revealing the intricate tapestry of his tattoos. He moved with a deadly grace that was both beautiful and horrifying. She stood in the doorway, watching, until he finally stopped, his chest heaving slightly. He turned to her, his eyes knowing. "They sent you something," he said. She didn't answer, but her silence was its own confession. He walked toward her, his bare feet silent on the mats. He stopped just before her, his body radiating heat. He was too close, his presence overwhelming the space. "You think hiding it from me will protect you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm not your mistake to fix, Rio," she said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I'm not Akemi." His expression tightened. He reached out, cupping her jaw, his thumbs stroking her cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, but strangely gentle. "No," he said, his gaze burning into hers. "You're not. Akemi died because I was careless with my heart. I will not make that mistake with you." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was a confession of possession, a vow forged in violence and loss. It was a claim. He was telling her that he would not allow himself to care for her in a way that would make him weak. He would protect her with the cold, hard calculus of a strategist protecting a vital asset. The tension between them snapped. It was a physical thing, an arc of electricity in the air. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, in the slight parting of his lips. She knew she should step back, run from the man who dealt in death and the life he was dragging her into. But she didn't.
She leaned in.
The alarm blared through the penthouse, a shrill, piercing sound that shattered the moment. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. "They've breached the ground floor," Haru's voice crackled over an intercom. This was it. The main assault. Rio was instantly transformed. The man holding her face with a strange tenderness was gone, replaced by the clan leader. He pulled away, grabbing a fresh shirt and his pistol from a nearby chest. "Stay in this room. It's the most secure," he ordered. But they weren't coming for him. Not this time. An explosion rocked the far side of the building, her side. The penthouse floor where her temporary bedroom was. It was a diversion, but it was also a message. Kaido wasn't just attacking Rio's fortress. He was trying to tear down Nia's world, room by room. Rio's face went pale under his tan. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not cold control, but a flash of raw, unadulterated fear. The one emotion he never allowed himself. He almost lost her. That realization was a crack in his armor. While his men scrambled to meet the primary assault team in the lobby, a secondary team used the explosion as cover, rappelling down from the roof. The glass of the dojo window shattered inwards. 2 men in black tactical gear dropped into the room. Nia screamed as one of them grabbed her, his arm a steel band around her throat, a cold pistol barrel pressed to her temple. Rio froze. His own gun was raised, but his face was a mask of cold fury. This was Kaido's plan. To put him in the exact same position he had been in with Akemi. To force him to choose. "Drop it, Tanaka," the man holding her snarled. "Or she dies just like the last one." Nia's mind raced, adrenaline singing through her veins. She would not be a pawn. She would not be his weakness. Her eyes met Rio's over the barrel of the gun. She saw the conflict in him, the agony. And she knew she had to act. Her hands, the steady, precise hands of an archivist, went to the man's wrist. She dug her nails into the pressure point just below his thumb, a trick a self-defense instructor had taught her ages ago. At the same time, she stomped her heel down, hard, on the delicate bones of his instep. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Rio needed. A single, deafening shot echoed in the dojo. The man holding her went limp, a perfect hole appearing in his forehead. He collapsed, pulling her down with him. The second man raised his weapon, but Rio was already moving, a phantom of violence. 2 more shots, precise and final. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Nia lay on the mat, tangled with the dead man, gasping for air. Rio was at her side instantly, pulling her away, his hands checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice raw. She shook her head, unable to speak. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. His heart was hammering as wildly as her own. He held her for a long moment, his face buried in her hair. It wasn't a hug of comfort. It was the desperate embrace of a man who had just seen his worst nightmare almost come true again. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. The fear was gone, replaced by something far colder. A final, absolute certainty. "This ends," he said, his voice a blade of ice. Tonight, he looked down at the dead men, then at the gun in his hand. He set it on a low table. She saw the faint sheen of sweat on the grip. His prints. Without thinking, she grabbed a towel from a nearby bench. She walked to the table and deliberately, carefully, wiped the gun clean. She was erasing him from the scene, making herself an accessory after the fact. It was a line she could not uncross. She was no longer an innocent bystander. She was part of his world now. In for a penny, in for a pound. Rio had a plan, a final gambit to crush the Ishikawa-gumi. It was a meeting, arranged at a neutral location, an old, abandoned temple on the outskirts of the city. Kaido Ishikawa had agreed, believing he had Rio cornered, believing he had found the perfect leverage in Nia. Rio intended to go alone, to present himself as a leader weakened by emotion, a trap Kaido would be unable to resist. He forbade her from coming. He tried to lock her in the penthouse with a full guard detail. But Nia was no longer the woman who had walked into that reunion. She was a woman who had faced death and chosen to fight. She would not be a prize to be protected or a ghost to be avenged. She would be a player in the game. She still had the photograph Kaido had sent her. "We know where you sleep." She looked at it again, not at her own smiling face, but at the background. Her archivist's eye, trained to spot forgeries and inconsistencies, saw something she had missed in her fear. A reflection in the cafe window. A man in a distinctive coat, holding the phone. And behind him, another man, one she recognized from news clippings about the city's elite. A city councilman, a man known for his anti-crime platform, shaking hands with Kaido Ishikawa's lieutenant. It wasn't just a gang war. It was a conspiracy. Kaido wasn't just reckless. He was being backed by corrupt officials who wanted the Kurosawa clan's influence erased. This was the leverage Rio needed, the kind of blow that didn't just kill a man, but dismantled his honor, his legacy. It was a weapon that struck at the very heart of their code. She sent a copy of the photo to Haru, Rio's silent, loyal second-in-command, with a simple message. This is his real weakness. Not me. At the temple, rain lashed down from a black sky, turning the ancient stone courtyard into a slick mirror of the flickering lanterns. Kaido waited with his men, arrogant and sure of his victory. Rio arrived alone, walking into the lion's den without a visible weapon, his charcoal suit soaked through. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. "You came alone, Tanaka," Kaido sneered. He was younger than Rio, with a cruel mouth and restless eyes. Bold. Foolish. "Where is the woman? I expected you to bring her, to beg for her life." "She is not your concern," Rio said, his voice dangerously calm. "She is my victory," Kaido shot back. "You, with your talk of honor and discipline. You are just like your father. You let a woman soften you, distract you. And just like him, you will die for it." As Kaido's men raised their weapons, a series of cars screeched to a halt outside the temple gates. Haru and the Kurosawa soldiers emerged, not with guns blazing, but with tablets and phones. On every screen was the photo Nia had found, displayed for Kaido's men to see. The image of their leader's camp consorting with a corrupt politician, the ultimate betrayal of the Yakuza code, which held a twisted honor in its separation from the legitimate world. A murmur went through Kaido's men. Their loyalty, built on a foundation of honor and fear, began to crumble. They were looking at their leader not as a fearsome warrior, but as a hypocrite, a politician's dog. Nia had not fired a single shot, but she had disarmed the entire enemy force with a single piece of information. She had acted decisively, using her intelligence, not brute force. Kaido's face contorted in rage as he realized what was happening. His power was dissolving before his eyes. In a final, desperate act, he drew a short blade and lunged at Ryo. The fight was brutally short. Ryo moved with the lethal grace she had seen in the dojo. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dissection. He disarmed Kaido, breaking his wrist with a sickening crack. He put the blade to Kaido's throat, and for a moment, Nia, watching from the shadows where Haru had brought her, thought he would end it. But he didn't. Instead, he did something worse. He pressed the blade into Kaido's own hand and forced him to slice off his own little finger, the traditional penance for failure. The cost was paid. Kaido's scream was lost in the storm. Ryo had not just defeated him, he had stripped him of his honor, leaving him alive but broken, a leader with no followers and no self-respect. It was a fate worse than death. The sight of it, the cold, calculated cruelty, was the true price of Ryo's world. It was a chasm that opened between them, a reminder that this man, no matter what she felt for him, was a king in a kingdom of darkness. Later, back in the silent penthouse, the storm outside had passed. The city lights seemed brighter, sharper. Ryo stood before her, the faint smell of rain and blood still clinging to him. He did not apologize for what she had seen. He would never apologize for who he was. "They saw you as my weakness," he said, his voice low and raw. They were wrong. He looked at her, and the iron mask was gone. She saw the boy from the classroom, the lonely man on the balcony, and the ruthless king from the temple, all there in his dark eyes. "You are my strength." It was his ultimate confession, more powerful than any declaration of love. It was an acknowledgement of what she was to him. Not a liability, but an equal. His partner. He extended a hand. "I can give you a new life. A new name, money. A plane ticket to anywhere in the world. You can go back to your books, your quiet world. You will be safe. I will ensure it." She looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of her quiet apartment, her peaceful archives, the predictable, safe rhythm of her former life. It was a tempting offer, a return to the light. Then she looked at him, at the man who had walked into chaos to claim her, who had shown her the terrifying depths of his soul, and who had just admitted that she, the quiet girl everyone overlooked, was his strength. Her old life was gone, violated by Kaido's threats, shattered by the truth of the world Ryo inhabited. There was no going back. There was only forward. She made her choice. She did not take his hand. Instead, she stepped forward and placed her own hand over his, her slender fingers covering the coiled ink of the dragon on his skin. Her touch was not a promise of redemption or a plea for a gentle love. It was an acceptance of the danger, the darkness, and the man. It was a silent vow that she was staying, not as his weakness, not as a woman to be protected, but as the queen to his king, in a dangerous, glittering empire of their own making.